As long as humans have been around, we've been looking for some kind of escape from reality. In this case, the escape that I'm focused on is that of role playing. Role playing is something that takes us away from the everyday, normal life of being human. Well, at least human the way we are. Role playing can come in all types of forms. Modern role playing, when we think about it, we think about maybe LARPing. People dressing up as fictional characters or pretending to be something that they're clearly not in the 21st century. Then when we think of role playing, we also think of maybe Dungeons and Dragons, the game where you crowd around a table with fellow friends and you pretend to be a wizard or some magical being in a world completely different from our own. Role-playing games have been around for a long time. In fact, there are role-playing games that are just 100% text-based. And even today, there are now role-playing games that can transport you into the most creative worlds, the most vivid worlds that we never could have imagined before. Maybe you want to be transported to a massive online community where you can role play as some sort of mystic figure and go on quests with groups and build whatever it is you want to build. Maybe you want to role play as a survivor of a nuclear apocalypse who is thrusted back into the world around him. Maybe you want to play a dragonborn who is in a fantasy land who has powers that people haven't seen for centuries. Or maybe you like human life so much as it is that you want to roleplay as a truck driver. Now, I'm not saying the life of a truck driver is boring, but in terms of role-playing, it's interesting that people choose to roleplay even things that they could do in the real world. But let's go back to role-playing with text. In the old text role-playing games, you would be provided some sort of substance for where you were, what you were doing, and perhaps that's all. And then you control things from there. But what if there isn't a game necessarily attached to the role-playing? The world of chat room role-playing is one that honestly I had no idea existed prior to a few years ago. These can look like forums based on some type of scenario or world that the creator posts, or they can just be events where people gather into a chat room and talk as if they weren't themselves, but someone in this magical or sometimes mundane world. But what I want to focus on is something that's popped up all around social media. Social media was once a way for people to connect, maybe across the globe, or even share things with friends online in their immediate community. But social media has evolved, and it is no longer the same platform it was, say, 10 years ago. And now, role-playing has seemed to find its own home on these social media apps. For instance, Facebook. While Facebook among the younger community has not been as popular in recent years, Facebook still remains the largest social media platform overall. And there are plenty of role-playing groups. For instance, if you search up a group where, you will find hundreds and thousands of different groups, well, with the title, A Group Where Blank. In this case, we see a group where 10 members are banned every day until there's only one left. A group where we pretend it's 2010 to 2016. A group where we all pretend we're in the Dream SMP. A group where we pretend we all work in the same office. A group where only introverts interact and are super nice to each other. Or maybe a group where you can only communicate in polls. Also, a group where you can only say egg, which was one of my personal favorites. But many of these groups are also role-playing groups, a group where we pretend. And in today's case, I'll be looking specifically at the most popular group for role-playing on Facebook, a group where we all pretend to be ants and an ant colony. Now, this group has 1.8 million members. If you all aren't aware, I come from the state of Montana, and Montana's population is 1.06 million. That means there are more people pretending to be ants in this ant colony on Facebook than there are in the entire state of Montana. That's just pretty shocking to me. This group was one that myself and many of my friends used during the beginning of quarantine. Every day there would be new posts that were even funnier than the ones before. Every day there would be hundreds and hundreds of posts that differed in content but essentially were the same thing. They were ways for people to share the ways that we were ants. Maybe this was by posting a meme that had to do with an ant, and then people would reply with one, maybe two words. Or maybe people would just post something that had to do with their day and how they were thinking about life as an ant. And then others would reply in ant language and further talk about that ant life. There's all kinds of different rules, some that are very straightforward and written down, and others that are more assumed. Rules that aren't necessarily rules, but are more instinctual and seem to come out of the act of role-playing itself. And there isn't just posts where people comment and pretend they're ants. In fact, this Facebook group has exploded into being a multifaceted group that expanded its outreach beyond Facebook. In fact, if you look at the Facebook group's About section, you can find out that there is a Minecraft server, there's a Discord server, and in fact, there are even more events that have happened in this group than I could possibly count. One of the biggest events that happened in 2020 was where the ant colony as a whole elected an ant queen. In the 2020 election of the ant queen, there were hundreds and thousands of different suggestions for who the ant queen should be. Now, while the ant queen is not an actual person, the name was yet important for the group. Some of the runner-up names were Dante DeVito, Beyonce, Aunt Jemima, and the ultimate winner, Doja Ant. While the name of the Ant Queen was voted on, in the Discord server, the Ant Queen is actually a bot that was programmed by the Discord server owner and not an actual person. In the Facebook group, there is also not an actual queen that is the admin or anything like that. What's most interesting about the group is while it is supposed to simulate an ant colony, there are obvious ways in which it is not literally an ant colony. Besides all the participants being human, as far as I know, people comment and speak mostly in English, things that ants can't do. Now, while that might seem obvious, what is interesting is the ways in which the colony and group pretends to be ants, but in the ways that they don't. They don't stay silent the entire time. They comment and post and write to each other. There is no actual queen ant. There is a system of administrators. And obviously, ants don't say things like dig or escape or feed. But the language that became adopted in itself is interesting because it is basically what looks like to be a human translation of what ants might say. So let's look at some of the specific rules that the administrators and community came up with. These rules are posted under a section of the Facebook group and are titled Ant Colony Guidelines. The guidelines are as follows. Number 1, be kind and courteous. Number 2, no hate speech or bullying. Number 3, no promotions or spam. Number 4, the Queen. Part A of this says the first letters of the word the Queen must always be capitalized. B, any posts that break this rule will be declined. Number 5, no antarchy. Anyone found committing treason will be banished from the colony. Number 6, ant names. Your ant name is just your name with ant in front of it. Example, Aunt Joe. Please only refer to each other by your ant names. Number 7, no sexually explicit, gross, or violent content. Absolutely no NSFW content. Number 8, no human politics. Part of this says that COVID-19 posts and comments specifically will be deleted. Number 9, repeating posts. Nobody likes to see the same post a million times, so don't post it if you've seen it in the group recently. And finally, the last rule is to respect everyone's privacy. Essentially, these 10 rules are a mixture of some pretty common rules you find in any Facebook group, mixed in with some of the more ant role-playing rules, such as respecting how the Queen should be referred to, or the type of content that should be shown and shared on this page. What it seems like this group is not necessarily a place where people can step into the shoes of being an ant. They're not actually being ants. Now, this is important because in other, for instance, role-playing games like I mentioned earlier, like the video game of Fallout, you are stepping into the shoes of this human that is coming out of a vault into a nuclear apocalypse. You are essentially one-to-one playing that character, but putting your own imprint on the character's actions and the routes they take. In this case, in this sort of social media chat room, people pretend they are some human version of ants. But why ants? Why is a group where we all pretend to be ants in an ant colony the most popular group? Is it because it was one of the first ones to pop up? I don't think so. In fact, a hypothesis would be the very nature of ants in an ant colony fits sort of the social media mold. One small ant being equated to one human in the massive, massive population that is social media. And so one, a part of a group of 1.8 million, essentially feels the same as one small ant in an ant colony of thousands, if not more. Sure, there are different types of ants meant for specific types of jobs, but every ant is an important part of the system. Now, while every person is not needed for this page to actually run, it is needed for the social aspect of the page to run. And so when there are thousands and thousands of people commenting on one post, there is more and more attention given to the post and more people commenting, pretending to be ants, and there seems to be some sort of grand build-up because more attention is given. For instance, there is this post made on November 20th at 1:09 p.m. where Kyle posted the word dig in all capital letters. That post received 199 comments. The first comment said huge dig in all caps. The next comment, dig, but with spaces between the letters. And lower down, dig again, help dig, drink, dig, use tiny shovel, and even cigarette. All of these words were in capital letters. Some of them had spaces between it, a sort of relic of the old language discouraged by the administrators of the group for accessibility reasons. This is just one example of one of the hundreds and thousands of posts that have appeared on this group page since its creation. When asked about the language of the colony and other important social practices, over 1,000 people commented to give their input. Some remained in the sort of ant talk to make sure that they could still roleplay as an ant. Other people talked about more of the underlying aspect of how you should talk in the group. For instance, putting emphasis on how puns are of vital importance to the sense of their community. They talked about how you should emphasize the word ant in any word. They also talked about how they often speak in single-syllable verbs and how redundancy is super common and encouraged. What was most interesting reading the comments to this post was that people decided, for some reason or other, to respond in a way that fit their personality. They either kept on the costume of being an ant, or they stripped off the costume and decided to talk in a meta way. That way they could communicate kind of on the outside of the group. What was most interesting was how much community was involved overall. Everyone was eager to share how this group worked and how they themselves felt a part of the group as a whole. People went even as far as giving definitions beyond what normal definitions come with words. For instance, in the dictionary for this group, the word lift was not simply just the action of picking something up and carrying it, but it was specifically to carry food. Or using the word hail, H-A-I-L, could mean, well, a lot of different things. But in this context, it always meant hail the queen. The queen must also be referred to at all times in capital letters. Now, these weren't rules that were set up by the administrators. They weren't rules that were set up by the moderators. And they weren't rules that were posted and voted on by anyone in the group. Instead, they became instinctual. It became a sort of self-moderation where comments that fit the mold were upvoted and given more hearts, and other comments that didn't quite break the rules but broke a sort of hidden rule of the group were left in the dust, not to be found. Another fascinating part of the group I talked about earlier was how it grew into many different things. A Minecraft server, a Discord server, but another big example of how the group evolved was its commercialization. Yep, that's right. Even a group about ants where people roleplay as being part of an ant colony is not safe from capitalism. In this case, the ant group made a merch store where they could purchase sweatshirts or shirts that said the words bite and lift and the phrases like feed the queen. These merchandise were just another important step in the group's evolution to becoming a multifaceted group that could reach a wider audience than the 1.8 million it already had on Facebook. They wanted this group to not just be a group on Facebook, but a group that existed in the outside world too. The merchandise aspect of the group even furthered this idea that people who were in this group felt like they were part of an exclusive group, even though the page was open to anyone. But yet, by being an active member of this community, one felt like they belonged and perhaps had a group that they could go to when they needed. Even though they didn't know most of the people in the group, it still felt safe for them. It felt like a place that they could go to. Overall, a group where we pretend to be ants in an ant colony is a great example of social media role playing. This group in particular was able to reach 1.8 million followers over the last 2 years. The peak of this group came during the quarantine period of COVID-19, which is a very interesting idea because it shows that at a time where people could not interact physically, they found pleasure in being able to interact virtually, but also by role playing as an animal. In this case, specifically, an ant. This group allowed millions of people to be able to interact with one another in a way they probably hadn't before. And in doing so, they were able to create memories and even make friends that they would not have otherwise. So, what is the overall message here? What do we get when we look at a group where we all pretend to be ants in an ant colony? Well, I would like to think that one of the most important aspects of this community is that it provides a place for everyone to feel like they belong, that they can be the ant version of themselves and feel like they are really a part of a community. Instead of apes together strong, it is ants together strong.